Welcome to the Silver Divorce Podcast, where we offer stories, advice, and support for people age 50 plus who are considering or facing divorce. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Pat. And Lisa, before we get started, I would just want to let everyone know that we are not attorneys and we are not counselors. We are here to share experiences and education we've gained to help you avoid pitfalls of the divorce process. Also, while the stories we share are true, the names have been changed to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. And so with that being said, what are we going to talk about today, Lisa?
Well, before we get started, Pat, we have a little celebration. I was checking our stats, and we have surpassed 1,000 plays.
Really?
So, yeah,
wow.
That's very exciting.
Woohoo!
Yeah, thank you to our listeners for tuning in and sharing. And as we said before, we're excited about the growth, but we're a little bit sad that there's so many people are going through the pain of divorce at the same time.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about those adult children. As in gray divorce, many times the children are adults, and it is a challenging thing for how you involve those throughout that process. Oftentimes when people are divorcing, their adult children are raising kids of their own. They may have small children, and sometimes it means that they're forced to face some challenges they had with their parents previously. Maybe there were some challenges when they were growing up. Maybe they don't have the best relationship with one or the other parent, and they might have one parent they're particularly close to, so they tend to get perhaps a little emotionally involved. So we have brought someone in very special to help us sort through those issues, and I am so pleased to have with us Kimberly Mathis. So let me tell you a little bit about Kimberly. She was a licensed therapist, but has been a life coach for the last 4 years. She has a premier coaching program designed to help you make substantial and lasting changes in your life. She also helps you to navigate those difficult relationships and give you some strategies to improve them as well. She supports anyone who wants to become more self-aware, more authentic, and more intentional in their actions. She sees clients virtually, but she has a podcast as well, and it's called Decisions Change Everything. She's a kayaker, a rollerblader, and she does her best to raise healthy, happy teenage daughters. So welcome, Kimberly.
Hi. Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So we know that divorce is widely talked about as being emotionally traumatic for the littler kids. And the research has shown between the ages of 5 and 13, it's very traumatic. And age 11 seems to be the peak when it affects them the most. But then we also know that adults are not immune to those effects of divorce. And perhaps you can just start by sharing with us some of the common impacts you see on adult children when their parents divorce.
Sure. And I am coming at this with the perspective of my education and background and training as a therapist. But when I was in my 20s in college and I was getting ready I think I'd just gotten engaged, my parents went through a divorce and it was completely unexpected. So I also have the personal experience of it as well. And I can relate to a lot of the things that tend to come up for people when they find out that their parents are getting a divorce, maybe years, after they have left the house. So several things can come up for children who find themselves in this situation. The very first one is grief, of course. Mm-hmm. It can feel for them like the family that they have always known is like disappearing. Mm-hmm. Especially there can be a sense of home that is gone, even if their parents have moved and aren't living in like maybe a childhood home. There is a sense for a lot of adult children, especially around holidays, reunions, trips back home to see parents, you are coming home. Mm. And so suddenly that feels like it's gone.
Right.
In addition to that, if their parents have lived in a home that maybe they grew up in, chances are something is going to change with that living situation, whether the home is sold or one parent is deciding to stay there and the other parent moves out. It's just going to be different. And so the childhood home is kind of gone. Another thing that I see happen is a negative impact on their relationship with either one or both parents. They might experience some anger towards one or both parents. It can also bring up a lot of insecurity and fears around their relationship. So it can trigger attachment issues, attachment styles. It can kind of make them reevaluate, like, wait, I thought, relationships were going to last for a long time. Could this happen to me? It can also bring up new stress regarding logistics. So when you think about, Christmas time and families and who we spend time with, now there are two households. So especially if you have small children of your own, it's like, how much time do we spend where? Is there enough room for us? It can just kind of throw the whole thing into chaos.
Yeah. And that it just complicates it so much more because you have not only the parents have separated, so you have to go to the mother's house and the father's house. Well, if you have a significant other, you're trying to make that significant other's family happy. And what if they also are divorced parents?
Yes.
So suddenly these adult children are trying to manage, how are they going to go to 6 or more places?
Yes.
And sometimes they just opt out and they say, you know what, we're going to stay home for this holiday because we can't figure out how to get to my mom and dad's, your mom and dad's, and their step parents, and it's just too complicated.
Yes. And in addition to that, if you have parents who are divorcing and they are not getting along,
right?
Like, it might be an option for them to be in the same, like maybe they come and visit the children at the same time and grandchildren, because there's a limited amount of time available for people to take off of work and whatnot. If you have two people who can't be in the same room, right? Not only does that create like another decision to be made about who comes when, but if they decide to come at the same time anyway, there's all this like tension there are dynamics.
Everybody around them is tense because they know what's happening with the family.
Yes.
And going back to that family home, I never really realized how important that was. I had moved around for my career several times, and I had gotten to a point where a house is a house, and but the kids really considered where I was living to be the family home.
Yes.
And I had to change my perspective on whether or not I was going to pursue keeping that family home. So that's something else that you just don't think about at the time.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I think comes up that can be difficult is when one parent maybe begins, or both begin dating. Whether there was a relationship that was extramarital, that they are now finding out about and maybe is continuing, or their parent just decides, I'm going to put myself back on the market. It's really odd to see your adult parent acting in some ways like a teenager because they have that new relationship energy. They might, they just might be having experiences that you have never seen them have before. And now it's with this other person that's not your parent. It's very odd.
Yeah, that happened to me, Kimberly. When I started dating my spouse after my divorce, the family wasn't very welcoming at first, and and then you have to look at a blended family, and that's a lot of work too. But I had to deal with that. I mean, everything worked out, but it's hard to manage that, and you just have to kind of roll with it and let things take place.
Yeah. So let's step back and talk about how to tell the adult children. Oftentimes, as you mentioned, in gray divorce, the kids have been out of the house for years, and they may not be aware that there was a problem or a struggle in the marriage because you don't necessarily share that with your kids. And we've heard from people who say they really struggle with how to tell the children. And I can tell you a story about a woman that I was talking to she said that she had been married for about 30 years, and they both had recently retired, and they were going through the typical adjustments when you first retire and suddenly you're thrown in the house together for 24/7, and that is adjustment. But she said they never discussed divorce. Her husband had never said that he was unhappy. And then one day he showed up at one of her adult children's house and said, "I'm going to divorce your mother.
Wow.
Don't tell her, but you can tell your siblings."
Oh my gosh.
And so that put
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I have so many thoughts about this.
That put her adult child in the situation
Oh
of,
my gosh.
does she betray her father and tell her mother, or does she betray her mother and let her mother get blindsided?
That's tough.
But those are some of the crazy stories we hear about how the
Wow.
adult kids learn about the divorce. So,
Yeah.
what is the best way to move forward so that you lessen that shock and that emotional impact?
Yeah. Well, when I think about this in these situations, I work with a lot of clients on making sure that they know like what is in their control and what isn't. And so I just want people to assume there will be emotional shock and trauma. Like there's no perfect way to say something or to announce it without it being upsetting. And you don't control how it is perceived. You don't control your children's emotional responses to it, their thoughts about it. You control none of that. The only thing that you control is your intention going into it, the thoughtfulness and deliberateness that you put into it, the tone you want to use, the information you want to give. Those are all within your control and your decisions. So ideally, we would want to tell children with both parents present, both parents kind of having a united front. And doing that really conveys to the children that we're all going to be okay. Like we are handling this as adults. We care about each other. We're wanting to make sure that you're okay. And it's also, I think, a way for the parents to mitigate what information is shared with the children, to answer any questions. And my suggestion would be to have a detailed conversation with your spouse before you tell the children, to discuss how much are we willing to share, what is off limits, what can we tell them, what questions are we okay with answering. And one area you really want to think about is stuff having to do with like finances or plans. And if you don't know what the answer is, it's okay to say we don't know, rather than trying to come up with something or throw out a bunch of possibilities. Just say we do not know, we will figure it out, and we'll let you know as things move along and progress.
Just try to keep it simple, right?
Yes.
So have a plan. You have a conversation and a plan for how are we going to tell the adult
and boundaries.
children. Right.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
You need to discuss boundaries around what information stays between the two of you, to include like explicitly saying to each other, I am not going to say bad things about you. I mean, this is all ideal. This does not happen all the time.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah.
this would be ideal, just to discuss, like, I'm not going to tell them X, Y, or Z. I don't feel comfortable discussing X, Y, or Z. Those are all boundaries you can have.
Yeah.
Right, because there's some things they don't need to know.
Right.
And it might change over time.
Sure.
And initially, when you're having that conversation, it can't just be a verbal download.
Right. Right.
They need time to absorb what's about to happen, and there might be some pieces that come out later. You both agree, well, we can tell them this later.
Well, and some children might have more, they might have a higher degree of like emotional intelligence. They might have better skills in terms of managing their responses and their reactions. And so maybe because of that, you are able to talk with them in more detail. But I think you can also decide what you want to say first, and then just kind of see how it is taken, and then come back later with more.
Yeah.
Kind of like baby steps, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Kimberly, have you experienced a situation where the children tend to blame themselves as the cause of the divorce. I understand that it's a common perception even for adult children.
I think it's not as clear cut as they blame themselves. I think most of the time there have maybe been some family dynamics, family situations.
Yeah.
Like maybe there was a difficult time financially for one of the children, and they know that that was stressful for the parents.
Right.
The way that our brains work, they're going to start looking back at everything to try to piece together how this happened.
Yeah.
Let me try to understand it. And so even if it really had nothing to do with that, their brains, again, because this is just how our brains function, they're going to look for things that help them to explain it, because this is also why people will often ask, well, what happened? Tell me what happened. The reason that they're asking that question, it comes from a place of fear. Because if we can know exactly why this happened, then we'll know whether or not that's going to happen to us.
Yeah, I think that's especially true if they've been out of the house for years and they had no idea that there was that level of problem in the marriage. So then they're going to do more investigation. You know, I need to figure this out because how could I have missed it?
Yeah.
And
it's very easy, I think, more so than blaming themselves. There's a tendency to find the parent to blame.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
would
who
say so.
caused
Right.
the majority of the issues? Who didn't do enough? Who was more difficult? Who is unwilling to work on it?
Absolutely. And I will say that there is a questioning of, what about counseling? I went through that with my children saying, why don't you go to counseling, and why can't you fix this? And so the children want it to be fixed. And, how involved do you get the children in those types of issues? And how do you...
I think, again, this goes back to ideally having a conversation before talking to the children, and almost like coming up with a script for those sorts of things. If you anticipate some of those questions or statements, you can almost sound like a broken record. Just, I'm sorry that you feel that way. We have come to this decision after a lot of talking, and this is what's happening.
Right.
And you just keep repeating that over and over. You do not have to justify. You do not have to explain. They're really not in that moment in a place where they can even really hear what you are saying in terms of your reasons, or we did try counseling, or we did. They're just upset.
They're in shock.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it also, takes them out of the role of child sometimes into the role of almost mentor.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you advice
Yes.
and mentor you so you can fix this. And so...
because they just don't want it to be happening.
Right. It's a dynamic shift as well. So... we also hear all the time about parents who tell the adult children stories about their spouse. There's the, I need to get you on my side so you don't think that I'm the bad guy in doing this. So what is the best way if you're the spouse who's, perhaps your other spouse has been doing that, telling untrue stories, you feel like I have to set the record straight. So how do you handle that situation with your child? And if you're the child in the middle of that, how do you handle that with your parent who's trying to influence you?
Yeah, it's boundaries. And if you do not have someone, a coach or a therapist that you are working with, I highly suggest getting one in this type of situation, for the children as well, because most of us do not grow up learning about boundaries, what are healthy boundaries, how to set them, how to hold them and enforce them. And I think if you are the child in this situation, there may be a part of you that wants to know, again, because you're trying to make sense of all of it, but it feels awkward. Like, in the moment, if this is not feeling good, if this feels uncomfortable, if you're not sure how to respond, that's a great indication that maybe you need a boundary here, that maybe this is not the kind of conversation that you need to be having. And while you cannot control your parent, right? A lot of people think about boundaries as like, I need to tell them I don't want them to say that to me. And if I'm doing it correctly, they won't say it to me. Boundaries are really more about self-care. It's about giving someone else the freedom to do whatever they want to do, but you will not be present for it. You will not engage in it. So they might say to their parent, this feels uncomfortable. I don't like hearing about this. I think this is something that you should discuss with the other parent. If you keep bringing it up, I'm going to have to leave. I'm going to have to leave the room. I'm going to have to remove myself from this conversation. I'm going to have to hang up the phone. That's really how to set a boundary. And the same for like a spouse who is in the situation where they maybe are hearing about, right, other things being told.
Right.
I think you have to stick to the facts, right? There's a difference between sticking to the facts and saying, I'm not sure why that's being said. That's not what happened. That was not my experience. There's a difference between that and almost like convincing, like coming at it with a convincing energy. Well, let me give you more details. Let me tell you a whole lot about it. And again, it comes back to, what do you control? You do not control the other spouse. If they are hurting the relationship with the children, that's going to happen regardless. That is their doing. Mm-hmm. You can't protect the children from that. Yeah. The only thing you can do is continue to choose how you want to show up in this situation. Yeah. Do you want to be someone who contributes to a bad relationship with the other parent? Or do you want to leave that in their control, and not try to take responsibility for it, and just focus on what you are telling them, how you are being supportive. If you are adding more stress and too much information, it's just kind of like staying in your lane, learning how to stay in your lane.
Yeah, that's really good advice, because I think, the natural inclination is you want to defend yourself and you want to set the record straight. And so then you're sharing more information that you ever intended to share, but because you feel like, I have to set the record straight. So
this is something I think for all of us, whether we're in this situation or not, one of the most difficult things to learn how to do, especially if you have been someone who identifies as like a people pleaser, if you've been in any kind of like codependent situations, is learning how to be more comfortable with being misunderstood.
Yeah, wow, that's so impactful. Learning to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, right?
Yes. Because it just keeps you chasing after, like, let me correct it. Let me give you more information. Let me make sure that you don't have this perception of me. And again, we don't control someone's perception of us. We could give them all the best information in the world. We could say it the right way, and they still have their own stuff
ultimately they're going to think what they're going to think. And it brings out the importance sometimes of maybe needing to do family therapy right from the beginning of, I know with myself, I took each of my girls and we had a therapy session, and they were able to get some thoughts out about feeling, perhaps blame or whatever. So we've talked about that before, how important it is. And a lot of people don't know that many insurance plans have clauses in them where they will cover therapy sessions. Right. And, research that, take advantage of that. Yeah. And get help right from the beginning.
There's so many options now. Since COVID, when COVID happened, I would say the telehealth side of things with therapy was like lagging behind the times, and that really pushed everything forward. And so now there's so many options that have popped up, with whether it's through your insurance or things like BetterHelp. There's just a lot of options, so you should be able to find something, even if there's not much in the area where you live.
And it's affordable. It can be affordable as well. And the important thing for me to remember was, I've never been through divorce. Right. They've never been through their parents divorcing. We don't know what we're doing. Right. And we may not have done it. I may not have done it well, how I handled it, but
how often do we see it done well?
Exactly. But there are people who can help you do it better.
Yes.
So, and that goes back to it with the adult children. It does tend to be come at a time when they're launching. They might be launching out of the house into college, or they're launching into their own career, and they have their own pain that they're experiencing. So, are there some coping strategies that I, as a parent, can give to my children to help them in addition to maybe seeking some therapy?
Yeah, I think, and this is not just for this situation. I when I have clients who have children, it can be so helpful to think about what you want to model for them. I don't know that there's a way to, I just don't think it works to try to impart coping skills on children that you don't use yourself.
Right.
And there's a lot of things that children see you doing that they are taking note of, whether it's explicitly talked about or not. So if they see you going to therapy, working with a coach, if they see you taking care of yourself physically, if they see you creating community and friendships and like changing or deciding what you want your mindset to be about it, that like, this is not the worst thing to ever happen. I will figure it out. Life will go on. When they see you taking responsibility for an emotional reaction that you may have, for apologizing, for making sure that you aren't blaming someone else for that and being accountable for it. I think all of that helps them and it teaches them how to do the same thing. I really just think that modeling what you would like for them to be doing is probably the best way to handle that. And a lot of adult children, they're also going to push back on something if they don't see their parents doing that. It's like, why would you be telling me to do that and take care of myself that way? You're not doing it.
Right. You're laying on the couch watching TV and crying all day. So don't tell me what I should be doing.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's excellent. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Kimberly, how does one know if they have a toxic parent? What are some of the traits of a toxic parent?
Oh, that word is used so often now. Like I see it on social media all the time, along with narcissist.
Yeah,
I think they can be overused. The way that I think about this is toxic. I want to make a distinction between unhealthy and abusive.
Okay.
I think that those are two different things. I think people can lack skills of communicating or being vulnerable or sharing their emotions or self-care. People can lack those skills, and so it may make the relationship more difficult.
Right.
It may cause more conflict, more tension. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily like bad for you. Mm-hmm. And then when I think we get into abuse, the things you're kind of looking for there are emotional and psychological manipulation, name calling, talking down to people, demeaning people, gaslighting, like that never happened sort of a thing, or you're just crazy. Those are some of the things you want to look for with abuse. And again, I think it's important to make that distinction because the words are thrown around so often. Right.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to share an experience I had. My ex-spouse put my daughter in the middle of a lot of things, and in my situation, he tried to manipulate my daughter to reconsider my decision to leave the marriage. He told her he was considering suicide and just other tactics to just get her to talk to me to change my mind. And, she was in college at the time, and this was exceptionally traumatic for her.
Can you imagine? That's awful.
Yeah.
That is that manipulative.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And the emotional and mental abuse caused by him, plus other issues, made her eventually step away from the toxic relationship with her father. Yeah. She had to go through a lot of therapy and continues to do that today. And I'm happy to say that she's healed and thriving right now. But, there can be a lot of manipulation that goes on through children, which I think is just horrible.
At all ages. Yeah.
So, Kimberly, during a divorce, a toxic parent may display even more aggressive behavior.
Yes.
Can you share some tips on how to best manage a toxic parent during a divorce?
Tips for the children?
Yes.
Let me think about this because it's so emotionally cluttered when you were the child. There's what you can logically know, and then there's what you're feeling in that experience.
Like, and especially if you're blindsided.
Right. thinking about your daughter, right? Hearing that a parent says they might kill themselves.
I know.
Right? Like,
I mean, putting that on somebody
Yes.
is horrible.
the emotional experience that that's going to create is going to be just overwhelming, and it's going to make it hard to think logically.
Right.
I think one of the best things to probably do is have someone, if you're the child, have someone, again, whether it's a professional, whether it is like a trusted friend, another family member maybe, that you can go to and like bounce this off of.
Yeah.
Because this is why, I'm a coach. I hire my own coaches. Like when we are
Right.
in the middle of things, our own stuff, we have a difficult time separating ourselves from our own thoughts and feelings about it.
That's a good point.
So I think having someone else to say, like, this is what was said, or this is what is happening. Like, can you help me think through it and how I want to handle it?
Right. But I think they tend to panic and just
Sure.
isolate. Like, what am I going to
Sure.
do? What
Right. Because I don't know if I should go to the other parent about it.
Right.
Yeah. And again, like, you got to have somebody. We are not made to be to be going through difficult things in isolation.
Right.
We need to have community. And if you don't have one, like, you can go to a professional, like pay someone to sit and listen to you and help you figure it out. With that specific situation, it's going to be hard to do. I don't even know that a lot of children would be capable of it. The thing to do in that situation would be to say, suicide or talking about harming yourself is really, really serious. I'm going to call your friend. I'm going to call your parents. I'm going to call someone and tell them, because when it's used as a manipulation
That's
tactic,
what he was doing.
Yes. When it is used that way, there's kind of an assumption that doing that is not going to have consequences. It's going to get them what they're wanting.
Exactly.
So what you want to do is make that a tool that cannot be used, that is not useful. So instead of keeping it to yourself, instead of going to the other parent, instead of, trying to engage with them more and talk them down, I would say you almost like call them on it. If that's true,
Right.
if I really care about you and you're really feeling that way, right? Because we also don't want to say, I think you're making it up. I think you're lying. We don't want to assume. We just want to say, hey, someone says this to me.
Right.
I need to call someone. Like, they need
an action plan.
Yeah, they need some help. It's a safety plan.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Right.
that's great. So, we know in the eyes of the law, adult children are not a consideration when going through a divorce. But as we mentioned, a lot of times they're perhaps in college or launching, and parents will help out financially. They might be paying student loans, or they might be paying tuition, giving money toward their housing. So when's the appropriate time to have the conversation with the adult children on how the finances will change after the divorce? And how much should they know? I would imagine that if my parents paying my tuition and suddenly they're divorcing, I would be freaking out about how's this going to work?
Good question.
Yeah. Again, ideally, parents have kind of come together to talk about this sort of thing and have a united front and be able to say, we know that this is going to be something we need to think about, and we will figure out. It may take a while, especially with the court system, right? There may be a parent that's pushing, even though the kids are adults, right, or over 18, there may be a parent that's pushing to have something written in to their divorce decree that the other parent takes over X percentage. You can write in a lot of things and a lot of agreements, and that may take some time, depending on how contentious it is there mediation, all of that. So I think the best thing to do is only tell the kids what you know for sure. If there are things up in the air, sure, you would like to be able to take away that sense of worry about it or anxiety about how it's going to end up, but you can't. That's just the reality of the situation. Right. So you can tell them, I know this is a concern. I will let you know as soon as I do know more details about it.
It's okay to say, we're still trying to figure that out.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. But I would avoid telling them something to make them feel better that you aren't certain is going to be the case.
Yeah. You always are working so hard to keep your kids happy. You don't, you want to take away that worry, but if you're not able to, and so, in our state, there's some mandatory mediation in contested divorces. And would you recommend that it be put into the marital dissolution agreement, whatever the couple agrees to, that you put it in writing.
Yes, you absolutely want it in writing.
Yeah.
I have seen situations where there was an agreement, of course I would always take care of blah, blah, blah. And then
It doesn't happen.
it may not even be like it was a lie, but they may have situations that come up in their life, whoever said that. Well, now their priorities have shifted, right? And so maybe that's not what they want to do anymore.
Or they've remarried and the new
Yes.
spouse doesn't want them to spend that money.
Yes.
That
Yes.
happens as well.
So it is the kind thing to do to put it in writing.
Mm-hmm.
If you really want each other to be okay and you don't have, you don't wish ill will towards your soon to be ex, the most loving thing to do is to put it in writing so that there is not conflict over it later.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Also, Kimberly, if there's been a rift in the relationship with the child because of the divorce, maybe there was an affair and the child holds that against the parent, or perhaps a spouse was good at telling stories that influenced a child. What steps can you or should you take to begin to repair a broken relationship with your child?
I think we have to think about this from two different situations. There's one that you mentioned where maybe a lot of things were said about you by the other parent, and they
That
may
weren't
not,
true.
Right. They may not be true. I would say the only real thing that you can do in this situation is to keep showing up in a way that is open and supportive and non-confrontational, not talking bad about the other parent. Over time, children usually come around. They usually, after a while, start to see these differences in how one parent is talking to me and talking about the other parent versus how this parent is
How
talking
they're
to me.
modeling their life.
Yes.
Yeah,
And that can be really, really hard because you want it fixed.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we have to look at what you have control over.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing is how you are choosing to show up and participate
Right.
and keep going on with that relationship.
Right.
Yeah, I know one woman said that her daughter said, he told me this story, but that just didn't sound like you. That just
Yeah.
didn't seem like it could be true.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to, they know you and they know what
Yeah.
you're likely to say or not say or act and not act.
Yep.
And if it's out of character, if the story they're telling doesn't fit your character,
Yep.
they're going to realize that
I
and
think you have
recognize
to
that.
play the long game.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
right.
That's true.
Mhm.
Play the long game.
And then the other situation, if you are the parent that maybe after some time has realized like, oh, I probably shouldn't have said all of that.
Uh-huh.
I gave them too much information. I don't like how I acted. I was going through my own stuff. The best way to repair is to have accountability for that,
Right.
to come back. And just because you have accountability and want to repair doesn't mean your child will want to.
Right.
Right.
Like part of it is, again, just learning how to let someone have the freedom to decide for themselves
Right.
what they want and not forcing something on them. So I would say, like, take accountability, tell them what you're wanting from the relationship, what you wish you had done, apologize,
Right.
and then see what comes of it.
And just let them process. Give them
Yes.
time.
Yes.
Give
And
them-
you could also ask them at some point, if you're having difficulty and you really want to make it work, you can always, like you said, go to therapy, invite them to go with you. I think kids
That's a good idea.
are often really, like, it makes an impact on them when they see there's a lot of effort being put in.
Uh-huh.
Just the suggestion of like, this matters so much to me, I will go to therapy with you, especially if they've never really seen their parent do that before. That can
Yeah.
convey a lot.
It's
Oh,
impactful.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then, there are a lot of parenting mistakes people make after the divorce is final. What are some of those that you commonly see that we can perhaps help people avoid?
Oh my gosh. I think there could be so many here. And thinking specifically, I think it's easier to think about them when we're talking about small children, because when you think about the role of a parent as an adult, it's significantly different than when you have maybe like a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
So I think it's less about parenting when we, like, in terms of discipline or rules, or saying, these are my values that I want you to have. This is how I want to raise you. And it's more about being a support for them, a confidant for them, someone that they can rely on and lean on. And I think the mistakes start happening when you aren't taking care of yourself and you start relying on the children to keep you happy, to make you feel better, to process some of the emotional things that you're going through. It's really more of I wouldn't even call it like a parenting mistake. It's like a enmeshment.
Yeah,
almost.
It's almost like you need to be very intentional
Yes.
about your own healing.
Yes.
So that you can continue to show up in a healthy, positive way for your adult children. Because if they see you
Yes.
move, as you said earlier, if they see you moving on and it is not the end of your world, then they can process and heal themselves.
Yes. And it's okay for your children to see you upset.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that can be helpful. It's, I think it can be disorienting for children or make them feel like their own emotions aren't valid, right? If they're really upset and they never see a parent grieving or sad, but there's a difference between showing normal, healthy emotion and giving them lots of details or asking them to talk through it all with you. You need to go to someone else your age for that. Go to another parent, go to a therapist or coach. Don't put that on your children.
Yeah, there comes a time when you just need to make it stop being a topic of conversation.
Yes,
Where
yes.
it's worn out.
Oh my gosh,
And
yes.
worn the family out.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's really good. So we talked a little bit about dating, and for adult children, they have a lot of fear of that somebody new is going to come in and take over and they'll further lose their parent. What are some strategies? And I read a lot of times that's often the first thought people have is, I want to get right back out there and I want to date and I need to find somebody. How would you go about that in a gentle way with your kids so they don't feel threatened that they're going to just lose you more?
I think parents often, I understand it. It's especially if you've been in a relationship for so long, there's a loneliness to it. You're now by yourself in a way that you haven't been in a while. It could also be that maybe you were feeling unloved in your relationship for so long that going out, having someone shower you with affection and compliments and, can be really exciting. I think the key, I don't think it's bad to be doing all of that. Sure, you want to be aware of like what you're actually looking for, what your boundaries are. But I think the thing with kids is to not bring someone else to them until you are really sure that they're going to be around for a long time.
Yeah, no revolving door, right?
Right. It can be very disorienting for an adult child to not only see you dating, but like there was this date and then there's this date and then, but what happened to the other person? I thought you were, they will in some ways like emotionally distance themselves from it because they don't want to
be involved,
start to like someone, right? If that person is not sticking around.
Yeah. So be careful who you bring around, how soon you bring them around, and just make
and
sure.
how many details you give them
exactly.
about your dating experiences.
That goes back to your adult daughter might be your friend,
right,
but not that close a friend.
right. You need to have your own friends that you can talk about all of that stuff with.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Kimberly, we've really enjoyed this conversation today, and we are going to do another follow-up on small children co-parenting. Would like to ask you to come back and join us for that.
Awesome.
That's a whole nother universe.
Yes, it is
of things to talk about. So, can you tell us about your social media presence? How can people find you?
Yeah, I am on Facebook. I am also on Instagram at the Kimberly Mathis. And they can also find my podcast, Decisions Change Everything, on Spotify and Apple. And then you can also go to my website, KimberlyMathis.com.
All right. Well, thank you.
Well, we have had a great conversation today, and I want you listeners to please join us on our next episode and make sure to subscribe to the Silver Divorce Podcast. We welcome any questions you may have, and you may also email us at silverdivorcepodcast@gmail.com, or you can join our Facebook page at Silver Divorce Podcast.
We also ask, if you're listening to Apple, please leave us a review. Apple reviews are very important for us to be recognized and to grow the podcast. So whether you are considering divorce or you're newly in the divorce process, we'll help you navigate, and we'll tell you things your attorney might not tell you. Until next time, remember, divorce is an event. It does not define who you are. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Pat. Till next time.
We'll see you next time. Bye now.